Hello everyone, I'm Stephen Brooks. I'm the RubberOnion and the host of this podcast about all things animation. This week's episode is an awesome conversation with two-time Oscar-nominated director Tomm Moore of Cartoon Saloon. You all know his films, Book of Kells, Song of the Sea, but you might not know something about him, and I'll let him tell you.
Hi, I'm Tomm Moore, teenage superhero, and you're listening to the RubberOnion podcast.
Tomm Moore was a superhero. Trust me, you'll learn more about that in the show. But before that, I want to tell you that I'm joined as always by my friend, fellow animator, and co-host, Mr. Rob Ulfo, who, if you listened to last week's episode, you'll know broke the ice, so to speak, by turning his camera around so he could plug in his headphones, which meant that the camera was now looking directly at his unmade bed and a shelf of creepy memorabilia, including a distorted image of the Coney Island mascot. Look it up. It's terrifying. Anyway, the fact that Tomm Moore immediately started joking about it and did not run away in disgust and dismay, I swear I didn't mean to rhyme that, it told me that this was going to be a great show, and I was not wrong. If you like what you hear in the show and you want more of this type of content and others like tutorials, video blogs, and of course cartoons, check out patreon.com/RubberOnion and consider supporting me. And check out the list of perks you get in return. There's some cool stuff in there. Finally, I have a book coming out this summer called Tradigital Animate, 12 Principles of Animation in Adobe Animate. The link is in the podcast post, so consider checking it out for a pre-order. Tomm was really gracious with his time, talked about a variety of topics, animation, how he got into it, how Cartoon Saloon even started, the state of Irish animation, going from hand-drawn animation to using computer programs, and of course talking a lot about Book of Kells and Song of the Sea. And I put a call out on Facebook asking for your questions, and boy, you guys gave us a lot, and I asked every single one of them. He answered all of our questions and went on various divergent topics. I mean, we talked about comic books, tattoos, werewolves. So that does it for all my groundwork here. Let's get into the good stuff. A little tip, by the way, listen for the Miyazaki story. It's one of my favorite little nuggets. Anyway, I want to say welcome to episode 125 of the RubberOnion Animation Podcast, and this one is simply titled Our Tomm Moore Interview. Enjoy. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. That should do it. We don't actually need to do that. I just wanted to see if I get a two-time Oscar nominee to clap on command.
When I was in Young Irish Filmmakers as a kid, actually, I used often the clap report guy, you know. That was the height of my authority, you know.
So I got a hard-hitting question right off of the top. We interviewed Rob Pratt, and the way he spells his name is ROBBPRATT. Your name is spelled TOMM.
That's right.
And I've never seen it spelled that way, and I was wondering, what is the extra M for?
I was Tommy as a young kid.
Sure.
I remember seeing a comic book artist called Tom Coker, and I thought that was a cool way to spell your name, and I started doing it when I was about maybe 14 years old, and unfortunately it just stuck. And I was a big comics fan as a kid. I met him actually at a Comic-Con in New York, and we got a picture together. You know, he drew things like Daredevil. And
Well, have you been watching the Netflix series, by the way?
I started watching it. I didn't keep going with it. We went on to Game of Thrones for a while, but I found it a bit too much for me. I think I was overly binge watching all that infanticide and rape and stuff. It was playing on my mind too.
Yes.
That's pretty much what happened with me. I stayed away from spoilers for a really long time, and then someone said, you have to get into it. You have to get into it. I binge watched the whole thing, and you come out the end of it just going, well, I hate everything. I hate everything and everybody.
Yeah, that's how I was at Breaking Bad.
And people that you're like, And my wife read all the books, and she said in the books it's more manageable, but when you're just being assaulted, but we were watching like 6 hours of it over Christmas. We were over binging on it, you know. But yeah, we must get back into Daredevil now that we've given up on Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I mean, Daredevil was supposed to be, that's the dark superhero TV show, but after Game of Thrones, I mean, it'll seem like playtime.
It'll be like the 1960s Batman TV show. Yeah, I actually, Frank Miller's Daredevil actually was one of the few Marvel comics I read when I was younger. I was more a DC guy, but I used to like Daredevil. He was a cool character.
So what are you into? You like DC mostly?
No, I don't really read superhero comics anymore. Somehow I was just born at the wrong time. Now superheroes are like super popular and stuff, but when I was a teenager, I was often pretty much mocked by all my schoolmates for being such a huge comic geek and loving superheroes. And I kind of grew out of it, and now suddenly it's like, you know, my son's friends are all super into superheroes, and so stuff. So I know all that stuff from the 90s, but I don't really follow it anymore.
Yeah.
I got much more into independent comics, you know. I don't know what happened, but I just sort of burnt out. I read so many superhero comics.
You read independent comics right now?
Oh, yeah.
What are you reading right now?
Right now I'm reading something called Best of Enemies, which is really interesting comic book about the Cold War relations between America and Russia. I just like comics that are different. I mean, I love Chris Ware. From the stuff I used to read in the 90s, I guess I still read Love and Rockets, Amy Hernandez. I really love that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'll read anything in comic book form. It's just I wandered out of superheroes a few years ago. That's all.
Oh, Steven's looking at his collection.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking for... There was a comic, I'm trying to remember what the name was. It was Astra's Polyp.
Oh, it's a great comic by Mazzucchelli. He did the Batman Year One. He actually drew Batman Year One. And when I picked it up, I thought it was such a great comic. Great use of the medium. I really love how he drew the characters in different ways depending on how their emotional states were. He's a sculptor and he's quite architectural and stuff, so he thinks that way. And then she's much more organic the way she thinks. And I thought it was a really great comic.
Yeah, I didn't finish it. I started pawing through it. And just another recommendation, I went, what is this? And it felt like it's one of those things I need to block out a set of time and really sit down and appreciate it. It's not just something you kind of flip through.
Yeah, no, it's a good one.
It's something you really got to appreciate.
It's worth a few reads. Yeah, it's the same with Chris Ware. His stuff, the Acme Novelty Library and Jimmy Corrigan, they're well worth diving into and giving the time to because there's a lot of reward. But I think these days with the internet, it's just so easy to just browse and actually given time to dig into something like a big thick book like that. Yeah, it takes a bit of resolve, but it's well worth it, I think.
So I usually like to put all the pressure on my guests and make you essentially introduce yourself and give a quick bio because usually people like to put in things like how you came to choose animation as a career, stuff like that.
I'm Tomm Moore. I was a teenage superhero. We had a superhero group called The Living Shadows. Me and Ross Stewart, who I share an office with now, he was the art director in Secret of Kells, and Ross Murray, we decided we were going to defend our hometown of Kilkenny in the Midlands of Ireland by sneaking out of our house at night in full costume, and we used to defend the streets of Kilkenny from evildoers.
I gotta be honest, that sounds like a villains group with the shadows and everything.
We were the Living Shadows. I had like a broom handle bow staff and nunchucks and stuff that we made ourselves. We were badass,
Who's your arch enemy?
We were always looking for an arch enemy. That was our big main problem. I mean, we do these missions, but we live in this little sleepy town in the middle of Ireland. So
we have these monthly animation battles with our listeners. We get a topic and everything. The last month's topic was superhero with useless power. I love the idea of someone having a superpower with absolutely no villain. There's no. It's just.
Yeah, why do you necessarily have to fight crime if you have this power?
Yeah, you could just have...
Sure.
I think that I heard of This American Life about superpowers. If you pick flight or invisibility. Have you heard that one? Pick one.
No.
Pick one. Flight or invisibility. Go on, pick quickly.
I gotta say flight, because if I say invisibility, I'm gonna sound like a pervert. Like, I know why.
I was thinking the same thing.
That's it.
Yeah, let's go with flight.
Flight is a hero. Invisibility is a corrupting power. Invisibility is a villain. It's the ultimate test, right? If you just ask somebody flight or invisibility, and if anyone says invisibility, don't hang out with that person,
Let's go outside of that. What would be your ultimate superpower? Or what was yours in the League of Shadows or whatever
Living
the name
Shadows, yeah.
Living Shadows.
I didn't have a superpower. I was hoping I would develop a latent superpower, like some kind of...
Oh, like a mutant.
Yeah, I was hoping I had something that was going to come to the fore. I was always hoping that might present itself. No, I didn't have any superpowers, unfortunately.
You're just standing in front of a microwave just trying to get that radiation.
yeah, exactly. I was just always hoping that... I was just kind of hoping for my parents to die horrifically and then for there to be some horrible chemical reaction, exposing myself to God.
So what would your superpower... If you could have a superpower, what would it be? That's such a standard question, but now I'm really curious.
That's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah. Gosh, what would it be? Wow. I don't know. See, the thing about flight, everyone thinks about it, but is it really that good unless you have super strength as well?
No, it's basically like a guy with a pickup truck. You'd be forced to help people move. And
I don't know how good flight would really be. I don't know. I used to always dream about... The two things I always fantasized about as a kid was super speed. I love the idea of being super fast.
Oh, yeah.
I also like super fast, like flash fast. And the other thing, which is just like a pure childhood thing that I still kind of go back to sometimes, just the idea of either laser bolts from your eyes or just from the tips tips of your fingers, just because it's so cool. Just because it's like, stupidly cool. Just being able to shoot lasers from your eyes.
I would think teleportation would be helpful for you.
I always like teleportation.
Yeah.
Nightcrawler.
Oh, now you're making me think.
You got to promote all your stuff in different parts of the world. You could just teleport there.
I would like that, yeah. There's been plenty of times where I wished I had the power of teleportation, now that you've reminded me, because I spend a lot of time in airports and stuff, so that's true.
Yeah, that was a nice diversion.
That was my intro. That's who I am when I was a teenage superhero. I don't know, I think it's just because we were talking about superheroes there. You just reminded me of all that. Yeah, before they closed the DC office in New York there back in 2010, I was lucky enough to visit it.
Yeah.
That was amazing. That's 666.
Oh, were you? Yeah, I've never visited there.
Yeah.
It was always funny to me that DC and Marvel were literally right across the street from one another.
Yeah, but I think they're all in
offices,
LA now. I think it's all become like a big vertically integrated.
Well, DC is definitely, but the comics for Marvel is still in.
Oh, great! That's great.
They're still holding.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So now it's more of an East Coast West Coast thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
I want to
Get on with the question.
Podcast. Well, I want to ask the question about saloon, like Cartoon Saloon. Was it just because it rhymed? Like for us, I think a saloon is a bar.
Yeah, us too.
Like an old timey bar.
I mean, that's where it came from.
Okay.
We had loads of really pretentious names, and it was like we were trying to name a band. It was myself and Paul Young. Our studio was just out of our bedrooms while we were in college. For a while, it was going to be Young Tom because he was Paul Young, so we were going to call it Young Tom, but we didn't want it to be our names. And then I think it was just a drinking session one night, and we thought, "Oh, Cartoon Saloon, that's genius!" And again, like the Tom with two M's, it's just one of those things that stuck. And it's quite funny actually, because I mean, we are developing some stuff now that's quite cartoony, but a lot of our stuff hasn't been like the cartooniest stuff ever. But we've got this kind of like, hey, wacky name like Cartoon Saloon, and then we make these like really earnest animated features.
I gotta be honest, the first one I saw was Secret of Kells, and went, "Oh, this is great. Who's this made by?" Cartoon Saloon. I was like, that does not cartoon. But I looked up saloon. The definition of saloon is a public room or building used for a specific purpose.
Nice.
Well, that makes sense.
Nice. Okay.
I totally didn't know that.
That's what we meant.
Yeah. Just proving that all great decisions come from alcohol.
It would be nice to have we used to talk about having a cartoon balloon and we could just travel the world in a big Zeppelin kind of thing. It would have been awesome.
So how did it start?
Yeah, I mean, I was in, when I was a teenager, I was in a group called Young Irish Filmmakers, which was where I met a lot of the guys who set up the studio with me, or a couple of them anyway. And then when I went to Ballyfermot Senior College to study animation, and I met some more people there. And then Cartoon Saloon was just sort of me and Paul banding together to do freelance work. So some of our clients wanted us to have a company that we could invoice from. So it was really as simple as that. It was really like an informal partnership between myself and Paul that then expanded to include like Nora and Ross and some of the other people that became the start of the company. So when we graduated in 1999, Young Irish Filmmakers gave us a space here in Kilkenny. They had like this old orphanage that they'd converted into like a kind of film studio for young people, mainly for kids, but they gave us a part of that to set up in, which was fantastic for the first few years. The rent was pretty cheap. It just gave us a place where we could base ourselves, and there was about 10 of us. And I mean, we lived on beans and toast. We had very little money. We had a small grant. That was barely as much as we were kind of getting from our parents while we went to college kind of thing. But it was just enough to live on. And because we'd never really worked anywhere professionally, we didn't know any better. And we sort of just struggled along from there. And then that was 16 years ago now. So the studio has thankfully grown from strength to strength. I mean, we've had ups and downs over the years, but we're at the moment, there's like 75 people working here. So it's booming at the moment.
You have beans and toast for your anniversary. Every anniversary, you celebrate with some beans and toast.
Stinky. There's too many people sharing the building now,
Okay.
No, but it is interesting to think about how it has evolved. Whenever we tell the story back, it's hard to believe it's been 16 years, for example, because it really was something that we had a lot of ambition and a lot of drive and focus when we were young. But I do think there was a part of us all, certainly me, that thought we'd do it for a while and then get a real job. So it is kind of amazing that this is actually our real job.
So when you started, it was just about getting contract work and things. Like, did you have an idea if you starting this thing going, we're going to make independent film?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, at the very, very start when we were in college, it was a way to do work on the side, just to do work for clients and stuff. And it was the start of the first kind of internet boom. People were spending money on internet content back in 2000. And so when we were studying in college, I was doing classical animation, but Paul was studying like multimedia, which was like a new course at the time for this new interweb thing that was happening. programming, and Flash was a new program and stuff. So, you know, we were just like doing like Flash e-cards and things like that. But then whenever Young Irish Filmmakers gave us a space, that grant was to develop what became Secret of Kells. So actually what we did was we'd spend half the week working on commercial work, as it were, whether that was TV commercials or e-cards for the internet or, you know, stuff like that. And the other half of the week working on developing what was to become Secret of Kells. But I mean, we were so naive. Like, we were 22, straight out of college, and we were like, yeah, let's make an animated feature film, you know? And we were so brazen, and we didn't know any better. It did take us about 5 years of kind of proving ourselves through doing commercial work, bits of other people's films and work for hire and stuff, before we'd kind of really proven ourselves enough that investors were willing to give us some money to actually go into production. So it was about October 2005 before we really had the budget in place and were really ready to go into production with Secret of Kells. So it was a long enough period between the first like energetic, yeah, let's do this, and actually getting into production. You know?
So the Irish animation scene is kind of booming right now. It's definitely growing leaps and bounds.
Yeah, it's massive at the moment. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
We had Don Bluth on a few weeks ago. Talked a little bit about when he went to Ireland. I think it was mid 80s to 90s, somewhere around there. I was just wondering if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on the Irish animation scene and kind of how you've seen it progress.
Yeah, I mean, that's our story. I mean, I went to college thinking I'd work for Don Bluth, you know.
Yeah.
His studio was basically winding up by the time I was old enough to go to college. Like, when I was a kid in the late 80s, it was pretty exciting to see that there was animation at that level being produced in Dublin, just up the road. And I remember when we'd drive past the studio, I'd be like, I'm going to work there someday. And I really had a dream to work there. By the time I kind of got to Ballyfermot, I'd gone off animation a little bit. I was more interested in comics. I'd been in Young Irish Filmmakers, and I played around. I'd even visited the Don Bluth studio. But I kind of got the bug again while I was in Ballyfermot. But I realised as I was getting more and more into animation, two things were happening. Toy Story had come out, CG was starting to dominate, and the Don Bluth studio was closing down. The Disney studio in Paris was on its, you know, final production, and we kind of realised that we could either go like a lot of our classmates and work in video games in England, or try and get into the States, which would require visas and stuff, or we could set up on our own. So we really set up in a wasteland. I mean, Don Bluth had gone, Jimmy Murakami had a studio that was kind of winding down. We bought the desks off him. He had done like the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles and stuff like that. And so we
You're the first person I've heard say Hero Turtles, by the way.
Yeah, they were the Hero Turtles here rather than Ninja Turtles. Yeah, we bought the desks off him. It was that's how naive and starry-eyed we were. We were buying very cheap animation equipment from established industry veterans who were closing down. We never questioned ourselves, you know. But
that's amazing. Do you still have those desks?
Yeah, I have one there. It's covered in pens.
Oh, look at that!
That's, I think some Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles may have been animated on that desk once upon a time. But we've gone almost completely paperless here in the studio. But for the first few years, of course, we were paper and classic kind of animation, paper and pencil studio.
Right.
And while we were kind of getting started, Brown Bag was going from strength to strength. They were similar size to us.
That's right.
They've become a huge force in animation here in Ireland. A fantastic studio too. And just so many. I mean, now I've lost count of the new studios that have
Boulder
popped up.
start in Ireland?
Yeah, Boulder, great studio. They're here in Ireland. I mean, Brown Bag have a studio in Manchester now as well.
That's true, yeah.
Telegale have a stop motion studio in Galway. In Belfast, there's a huge amount of VFX and animation work. I mean, Game of Thrones is shot, a lot of it's shot in Belfast, and a lot of the work is done there.
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, here on the island, I mean, we have so many studios and so many opportunities that I couldn't have dreamt of when I first graduated. And what's really nice is the vast majority of those studios are owned and run by Irish people. So it isn't like a situation where, like, when Don Bluth came in, there was a favourable environment for a certain period of time, and then he moved back to Phoenix, where people are kind of invested in keeping the studios going here because we're from here. So I think that's a really positive thing for the industry too.
Do you get subsidies and things like from the government, like the Irish Film Board type of thing?
Yeah, the Irish Film Board were a huge part of it. I mean, I was going to say that, like, I was at my wife's cousin's daughter was 13 the other day, and we went to the birthday party, and one of her little friends came up and said, "Oh, when I grow up, I want to work in Cartoon Saloon." And I really liked that idea that, you know, you could grow up in Kilkenny now and imagine a career in animation here, which is something that was beyond the beyonds for me as a young kid. But yeah, the Film Board are great. I mean, the Film Board supported us from very early on, and we're really lucky in Ireland. We've got the Irish Film Board. We have a certain amount of support from the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland for certain projects, and we have a great tax incentive scheme. So between those supports, we've been able to co-produce our own projects as well as doing work for hire, you know.
What I was going to ask about the Irish animation is that the first two films, Secret of Kells, Song of the Sea, there's a lot of Irish folklore, Irish culture. I didn't know if that was like a stipulation of the money that you got from Irish Film Board or anything. The content matter? Is it a desire to share your culture with the world or set yourselves apart, business move type of thing? Or is it just a write what you know? Or is it all three of them?
Yeah, I think it's all three of them. I mean, it certainly wasn't a stipulation of the Irish Film Board. I mean, Secret of Kells came from us in college very earnestly kind of talking about and being inspired by things like Richard Williams' Stephen the Cobbler and talking about 2D animation and how could we kind of do something that could only be done in 2D animation and looking at Irish art and Irish manuscript tradition and wanting to come up with a story that was inspired by that. So, I mean, it really just grew out of that. I think Secret of Kells was more an art direction movie first. You know, it was more like an animation student sort of idea of a movie, like what would be cool to see animated.
Right.
And for me, Song of the Sea was more motivated by, sharing the folklore. Because, I mean, by diving into all of that on Secret of Kells, I always say making these films is like chain smoking. I think I've said that before. You know, you kind of like the next one off the end of the previous one. So Song of the Sea just kind of grew out of Secret of Kells. A lot of the research and a lot of the influences that I picked up working on Secret of Kells, I fed into Song of the Sea. And I was developing Song of the Sea while we were making Secret of Kells. So it was somewhere I could kind of put all my ideas that there wasn't any space for in Secret of Kells. That's why those two are so related. And I do have one more kind of Irish folklore story that I'm working on at the moment. But other than that, no, there's no reason to do it other than I'm interested in exploring that subject matter.
Is that the Wolfwalkers one?
Yeah, that's the one. That's probably going to be my next film.
Would you want to return to these worlds, like doing sequels and stuff, or do you feel like that would kind of ruin the magic of the first movies?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of sequels like that. I don't know. I mean,
Secret of Kells 2, Electric Boogaloo. That would happen.
Song of the sequel.
Wow. Have you said that before? Did you just come up with that on the spot?
I wish I just came up with that on the spot.
Oh, man.
I've said that before. But no, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know, maybe some special projects or something. I mean, I do find it interesting that I continue to be asked to draw Aisling characters that people like from Secret of Kells. It's funny that it's over 10 years now since I finished working on that, I think. So, but anyway, no, I like to kind of move on to new projects. And I mean, that's one of the benefits of being a kind of independent producer. We can kind of do what we like. We're not beholden to do sequels by some higher up.
Yeah.
That's probably my favorite thing about being an independent producer is that we really do have final say on that kind of thing. So it's not like the people who work in the big studios who sort of have to answer to a whole committee of executives who are thinking about business stuff. You know?
So you were talking about Secret of Kells as being like an art direction type thing. You want to make something that would look cool animated, or what would this look like animated? The first time I saw it, I'll just say this, the thing that got me was all the swirls and spirals and knots and everything, and I just thought, that must be a nightmare to figure out how to animate.
I don't know. I think it evolved. I mean, we had 5 years, as I said, developing the style. I was mainly focused on animation and layout in college, but we were always really interested in illustration. And as I said, I'd kind of gone into college with an eye on getting into illustration and comic books, and I thought, oh, well, I learned to draw and animate. And then I kind of got the bug again by doing animation. I mean, Ross Stewart, who shares an office with me and he's going to co-direct Wolfwalkers with me, we've been friends since we were about 11 or 12, and he's majorly focused on painting. Like, he has a whole second career as a painter, and I think he brought some of that influence to Secret of Kells because he was the art director on that. But yeah, I guess the style just evolved. I mean, there was a joke in the studio recently where someone was complaining about the spirals they were working on, and someone said, oh, if you want to work in Cartoon Saloon, you're going to have to animate spirals.
I did see it increase, by the way, when I saw Song of the Sea, and I just went like, it's almost like they went, oh, that wasn't as hard as we thought it would be. Let's try to make it even harder. I've heard you say this before, being influenced by Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki. I also got a feeling the first time around, I don't know if I'm pulling this out of my head, Gendy Tartakovsky, more Samurai Jack, less Hotel Transylvania, I guess.
Yeah. Gendy was, Samurai Jack and all that stuff was a huge influence on us. I mean, I remember seeing even the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoons that he did, and I thought they were amazing.
Right, the miniseries,
I thought they were amazingly cinematic on a really limited budget. So for us, that was really inspiring. And also, the style we tried to evolve was something that we could do for, 6 million euros, which sounds like a lot of money, but the majority of animated features costs multiple times that. And we had to kind of do it between a co-production between different studios in Europe. So we had to come up with a style that was sort of reasonably efficient, but still cinematic. So yeah, that would have been something we looked at a lot.
Yeah, the backgrounds itself is just amazing to look at how well it goes with the characters, and it tells a story on its own, which I like a lot. There you go.
He's a big background guy. Every time we talk about something, he's always looking at two things. There's the color and the backgrounds. And actually, we saw Song of the Sea together in IFC Center in New York, and you were there.
Oh, cool. Okay, I was there, right?
Yeah.
And you were in Manchester as well, right?
I was. Yes, I was. I was there in the theater when someone raised their hand, and they very, very politely, very sweetly asked you to describe the tattoos on your arm, and you had the like sleeves rolled up a little bit, and it was so funny because very subtly you kind of reached your arm up and you kind of pulled your sleeves down just a little bit, and I saw you caught yourself. And this is probably setting a bad sign if I immediately roll down my sleeves. But then you said that you were kind of learning to be a tattoo artist type of thing. I thought that was cool. You were visibly uncomfortable, but it was a cool question anyway.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, anyway, no, I am really interested in tattoo art and stuff too. But
yeah. So I guess what we're saying is welcome to Tattoo Talk with Tomm Moore. Actually, when I was thinking about it, Rob and I had joked about this earlier. We came up with a few names, and I had written them down. Tattoo Talk was one of them. Tat Chat was another one. Rat-a-tat-tat. The other one was Whose Tat Is That? And then my favorite one is Who's Who of Tattoo, and its sequel, Who's Who of Tattoo 2.
Ooh, Tattoon.
Tattoon.
Oh, yes, Tattoon.
It's a tattoo animation company I'm going to open up.
Oh, you know what I saw? I had this idea, and I thought I could do it, and if someone has done it before me. Someone has done an animation where they've tattooed, like hundreds of people of successive frames and then shot it like stop motion style. It's pretty. I think it's for some. Yeah, someone sent it to me. I was like, dang, I wanted to do that. I had that idea a few years ago. I still
that's amazing.
I mean,
great.
I still haven't. It was one of those things. I've been talking to a guy that does some of my tattoos here in town, and saying I want to learn how to tattoo, and I've been talking about it now from like over a year, so I really have to get down and start doing it. But I'm so busy with the whole animation thing.
Yeah,
I will get to it.
I am actually really interested in that. Is that like a certificate or something that you get? Is it just a trade?
Yeah, it's really just a trade. And I mean, what he suggested is that what I'll do is I'll probably do some designs, because people do get tattoos of our stuff sometimes. So we'll try and make it that I do some designs that he offers, and then he'll kind of let me apprentice a little bit while he's doing tattoos of my designs, and then that'll be kind of a unique thing that people can come and visit the studio, and if they want to get a tattoo, they can get a tattoo designed by me. So that's something we're working on. But
Guy, do you know what door you just opened? You now have opened the door for people to come into the studio and get like an Ashland tattoo from Tomm Moore.
Bleed all over the studio. Stop, you're bleeding on the carpet. Can you leave?
Wow.
Maybe someday. I think I'll have to practice for a while first.
Let's quickly go through Secret of Kells, because we kind of went through this already, but this is the first film that the studio produced on its own, on your own. That talk that you gave in Manchester, you talked about Franken-financing. I was going to bring that up in Song of the Sea.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was the same thing with Secret of Kells?
Secret of Kells was a little simpler. I don't know if you remember a movie called The Triplets of Belleville, the Belleville Rendezvous. So the producers of that in France and Belgium, Didier Brunet and Vivian van Vletteren, basically they were interested in making Secret of Kells as the follow-up. They produced that. So we raised the finance between France, Belgium and Ireland. And we actually did the work between France, Belgium, Ireland, Hungary and Brazil. So we had five different locations working on the film at one point.
Wow.
And then similarly Song of the Sea. So it's just a way to raise the finance with smaller companies for the rights for their territory, and then we share the rights for the rest of the world. And that kind of co-production model, it's pretty common in Europe. I find it really free. I find it a really nice way to work, because whenever we do like work for hire where we're outright commissioned, at the end of the day, that person who's commissioning you, they've got the goals, so they make the rules, And whenever you've raised the finance in your own territory and there's no one partner that's over everybody else. I mean, on Secret of Kells, Didier was the most experienced guy, and obviously we listened to him a lot, but I still had final say and final cut, because I wasn't just a director for hire, I was a producer, director and studio owner as well. I kind of followed that model again, even more so on Song of the Sea, where some of the studios that we worked with, rather than working with producers, they themselves became producers. And so Song of the Sea was really a coalition of the willing, let's say, where like 5 small studios in Denmark, Luxembourg, Belgium, France and Ireland teamed up and just raised the finance to do their part of the work, and we kind of made the film between us that way. It's a really indie model, but you can still raise a decent budget, like maybe Song of the Sea was like €5.5 million.
And at that point, you're drawing at least the keys on paper. Did you draw everything? Did you in between everything on paper?
On Secret of Kells, everything was on paper. Flash was used for some dream sequences and some like little characters in backgrounds and stuff, but the majority of Secret of Kells was on paper. It was all punched paper. I mean, stacks and stacks, boxes and boxes of paper. And then for Song of the Sea, we moved to TV Paint, which was actually, there was a little bit of resistance to it at the start, but actually it was great, because I think the animation was better because of that, and we were able to share the work easier. We weren't using a courier service like to send folders full of paper around the world. We were able to draw directly over each other's files, and the communication was much more instantaneous. But it is a little bit our trademark that we do everything by hand, so we're always a little bit sheepish talking about TV Paint, trying to explain, but it's still drawing every frame by hand, as if there's something to be ashamed about if you do it on computer, it's ridiculous.
Actually, I don't remember what episode of the podcast it was. We were talking about this, how the terminology is just, there's 2D, there's 3D, there's traditional animation, there's CGI. And the thing is that those terms I don't think are accurate enough. No. I came up with the idea of hand-drawn and computer models because you're still doing CGI technically if you're drawing into the computer.
That's true.
But you're drawing it by hand. Yeah. And then the other way is computer model.
Yeah, and even if you do, like we do Puff and Rock with Anime Studio Pro, so it's like a kind of sophisticated cut-out paper animation system. Even though it's 2D, it's all pre-built kits. So to me, that's CG. To me, that's like animating in CG, right? Even though the final look looks like a picture book, it's not like frame-by-frame drawing, whereas the features are frame-by-frame drawn animation. So I think your definition, hand-drawn, is a much better term. But we mix it up. I mean, Song of the Sea has some CG assistance. Like, I mean, the sea was made out of hand-drawn waves that were replicated in the compositing software. So, like, we didn't animate the entire sea. We only animated maybe 10 waves and then used them to make the sea. And some of the vehicles and stuff were animated in the computer. They were painted on paper, scanned in, and then we used Anime Studio Pro to move them. So, I mean, it's a real blend. I mean, the final look, we want it to be organic. We want it to look like an illustration. I think it's got a timeless feel to it. Hand-drawn animation has a timeless look to it. But to do it the way we make them, on the budgets we make them on, I mean, we're far from a purist. And anyway, I always think people are so crazy when they talk about pure anything. I mean, cell animation was a technological evolution from drawing everything on the same sheet of paper like Winsor McCay, Right. Xerox was a technical innovation. It was a new technology that put a load of hand inkers out of work. Bit by bit, I mean, even some of the Disney Renaissance guys who were like really into paper and pencil, all their stuff was coloured in caps, all their stuff was scanned in and cut, wasn't painted on cell. So I think there's always been this sort of blend of technology, and to me it's just about process, how you do it, and the final result. Does it have a timeless feel, or does it look like a kind of new technology that's going to date really quickly? Like if you look at Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 3, you can just see that the technology has moved on so much.
Right.
Whereas if you look at Bambi and anything from the Disney Renaissance, they sit side by side.
So what's the learning curve like? I assume you have to do style tests and things. The style test is what popped into my head when you were talking about the waves, because I was just imagining someone needed to sit down and figure out how are we going to animate the things that look like this.
Yeah. I think the sea was the toughest bit. I mean, most of it was fairly well figured out ahead of time. I mean, Adrian was the art director and myself had a long enough development period where we'd done like what we call scene illustrations, which are pretty final compositions of how we want the film to look. And then we'd look at those scene illustrations and plan it with Jeremy Purcell, who's the effects supervisor, and Serge Ume, who was the compositing supervisor. We'd figure out how we were going to do everything and make a little plan for that. But with the sea, there was a lot of different tests and we were kind of panicking about that right up to the end. When Jeremy came up with that technique in the end, I thought it was pretty successful because it felt like the rest of the movie. It didn't feel like suddenly we had like a big CGC, which is what I was afraid of. It was a way to use computers to allow us to do those sequences, but still keep that hand-drawn look. Because at the very start, I wanted to animate like Ponyo, I wanted it to be like a fully hand-drawn, hand-animated stormy sea. Right. And we just couldn't afford it. So it was really clever that And I actually think what Jeremy came up with in the end with that layered effect was more stylish than if we tried to do like Ponyo style, where you might have seen...
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's very storybook-ish.
Yeah, like a pop-up book.
Where you pull the tab and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought that too. Yeah, and that's interesting because it's a style that evolved, but it's also a style of necessity. You know what I mean? Like it's also like, designing your way around your budgetary limitations.
Those always give really good results. I mean, every time the best behind the scenes features I always watch is, I don't know, like Blade Runner or something like that. There's always some
smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. We were down to the wire on this type of thing. And you brought up Triplets of Belleville earlier, and I thought it was an amazing movie. But the thing that stuck out like a sore thumb in that movie to me was the ocean scene.
Oh yeah, because
that one really started.
Yeah,
it was very CG.
And that very early 2000s thing where 2D and CG hadn't really been mixed well yet. Nobody had. You could always tell the CG prop or whatever that got added in.
I, by the way, went to, when I was in Dublin, I think I mentioned this on the pre-call, that I went to Dublin, and one of the things I actually went to was the Book of Kells. I think, what was it, Trinity College?
That's right, yeah.
The most amazing part of that was just a tiny little video, very small screen that was off to one side, and it was showing someone replicating how they drew it.
Yeah.
And there were like 3 or 4 different people,
right.
And you could see the different styles. You had to do that essentially in the film. I mean, you had to replicate some of the look of it. How much research was done on that and replicating that kind of visual style?
Early on, a lot. And I mean, even if you saw, I don't know if it's on the DVD DVD or anything. And maybe it's in the art book, you know, you can see how the style at the start was much more sort of Disney inspired or whatever. The more we dove in and kind of absorbed those influences, and we're really lucky, we were encouraged by Didier, the French producer, to go as far as possible away from a Disney look. So he was actually looking for something that looked really different, and he was really, you know, inspired by the idea of doing something that looked like medieval art. And we even had the kind of blessing of the keeper of the book, Bernard Meehan. He's been really nice to us over the years. I think at the start he was a bit suspicious. He didn't know quite what we were up to, but he was still really helpful and gave us like microfiche imagery that we could study the details of the page. Yeah,
that's nice.
Stuff like that.
It's bigger than I thought.
Yeah, and it's divided up now into like 4 pages and stuff.
4 parts, yeah. They took the Gospels around.
I think the thing for us as well is that growing up, we kind of only realised in art college that all the Celtic imagery, like whether it was on like Irish dancers' dresses or people would get tattoos of it, or it would be like on the signage on an Irish pub or something. It was on our currency before we had the euro. All of that came from the Book of Kells, so that's sort of why we look towards that for our ideas.
The other thing is that you have early Christian history, but you also have Irish folklore. But I can never remember the second part, but I always remember the first part of the spirit's name, Crom because of Conan the Barbarian.
Exactly. Crom.
Also, in the talk that you gave, the well in Song of the Sea, where they go to, you were pointing out merging of Christian imagery and
pagan.
It's a real place, right?
Yeah,
where the merging of the two, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it happens all over the British Isles and maybe in Europe as well. I mean, I remember going to Bath in England and they had Roman and Celtic gods decorating the old Roman baths. You know, there was a period in history where I think all these beliefs kind of overlapped much more, and I think it lasted a bit longer in Ireland than elsewhere. And so you'd have people like even of my grandmother's generation who fully believe in the fairies and all that stuff at the same time as being devout Catholics. I always thought that was really interesting how these places around the country are actually kind of layered with beliefs going back pre-Christian all the way back to the early times. So I just think that's always an interesting thing to explore.
I didn't know if you had anything to expand on, but when you brought it up, I went, I wouldn't have picked that out, but that's really interesting kind of little tidbit that's in there.
In Song of the Sea, it was kind of a theme that was running through, that the modern world was just like a thin layer on top of this more ancient culture and heritage. So there was sort of this mixing all the time. Like even the witch's house was like an old crannog, but she still would have like a microwave and a radio and, you know, kind of modern lights and stuff like that mixed in.
I really did love, by the way, that there was the real world and the magical world or whatever. The designs were the same. There was the Grandma the Witch and everything.
That's right.
And it reminded me a lot of Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
Because that's the idea of the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. And in Peter Pan, they often have like, you know, Captain Hook is the darling father as well and stuff like that. So that kind of mirroring. We hit on that pretty late in the story development, actually. It was something that we realised the first few drafts of the script were pretty meandering. They had a bit too many folklore influences, and it was only when we pared it down to everything that mirrored what was going on in the main story, the kids' story. The folklore then all became a reflection of what was going on in the kids' lives. And then it got much stronger, and then the designs and everything changed to accommodate that.
The thing that we pointed out when we were watching it is that as the credits are coming up, Tomm Moore was like in every, you know, director, producer, story, craft services.
Yeah. Someone said that. Someone said more than 2 credits is an asshole. You know, I heard that. You know.
No, I'm looking at that going, I love this because you're one of the founders of the studio who's actually putting it out, but you're very hands-on on the production.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, which do you feel more like?
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, of those credits, head of Cartoon Saloon, director, producer, and because you were animator on there as well.
Yeah, I did a little bit of animation on it. I like to stay involved in every stage so I can understand and appreciate. I think the storyboarding part is the part that I feel most engaged with. Design and storyboards, that first part, when you're designing it and kind of writing it and drawing it at the same time, that's the part where I really feel like I'm a filmmaker, like when I'm coming up with everything. And then after that, there's different parts where I'm more and less involved, but often as it goes further down the pipeline, I'm more a director and just like overseeing everything. Yeah, I guess at different times I wear different hats.
I thought it was a little crazy though to have Cartoon Saloon's custodial work and your name there too.
The janitor.
Oscar nominated toilet cleaner. You know? It happens.
So you said you worked on TV Paint. I said I was going to get back to that, but you also mentioned just one thing. You kind of said it offhand. I didn't ask. You said you could draw on other people's projects. You're talking about working with people in different countries and everything. Are you using something like Dropbox or a more proprietary thing to share all this stuff across the board? Like, how do dailies work?
Yeah, for Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea, the way it worked was we used a software called Hobsoft, which was developed by 2 Danish guys for European co-productions like that. And that meant that all the studios were all linked up up one central server, I think it was in Switzerland. Every time we'd update the animatic, anybody who'd made a scene ready for approval would come into the animatic. So no matter which studio I was in, I could always watch the animatic and see the latest animation or cleanup or whatever stage it was at in the timeline. And so that was really helpful. While the scene was marked ready for approval, I could go and open that scene in TV Paint and draw over it, or the animation director could draw over it. We could share files pretty easily that way. So yeah, that was how we did it.
Was it all European, or did you have any from North America or anything like that?
No, I don't remember. Maybe there was a couple of artists from North America.
I'm just thinking about time difference is all I'm thinking about.
No. Yeah, because that's the big thing on Breadwinner now. Like, Nora's co-producing that with Canada. That's another concern that they have. They're dealing with a studio in Toronto.
She was your co-director on
Secret of Kells.
Yeah,
right? She's directing the Breadwinner now.
Yeah, which was interesting. I was going to ask about the decision-making of what gets greenlit at Cartoon Saloon, because the first two are very Irish. And this one, girl goes undercover as a boy in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan to provide for her family. It's a very different story choice. But, I mean, you just came out of Sequence in The Prophet, right? I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, but it was nothing really to do with that. I mean, the way it worked was Nora had been developing a couple of her own projects. That book kind of came into the studio a couple of years ago. And I think Jerry Sheeran, who's our managing director, brought it back from a meeting in New York. And I remember looking at it going, that's never going to get made. I just thought that was a really tough sell of an animated feature. But, you know, it kind of gathered speed. The co-producers in Canada were able to put the finance together. We were able to partner up again with the studio in Luxembourg. And it kind of came together pretty quickly. I was amazed. And Nora had taken it on as a project that she really wanted to do. It deals with, you know, women's rights and children's rights and stuff like that, which I think was close to her heart. Faster than most of our productions, it kind of came together. And it even has North American finance in it. I mean, G-Kids have become partners in it. They've invested much more than they've ever invested before. They usually bought our films when they're finished. This time they've come on as partners early on.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and there's other partners out of LA. I mean, Aircraft Pictures have an office in LA as well, and they've brought investors on from Los Angeles, and the actor Angelina Jolie is a executive producer on it. So it's sort of, it's a little bit of a bigger budget. I think it's about 10 million euros, and it's a little bit bigger production, less of a sort of just coalition of the willing of studios teaming up to try and do something, and more of a production in the normal sense that way. But still, Nora has a lot of autonomy, which is fantastic.
You mentioned something which, as you were saying it, I lost it. Rob, you got a question while I remember what my stupid question was and my stupid brain can't remember?
Well, with something like this, I can imagine just the lack of sleep and just kind of just laying in bed like, oh, this is so overwhelming. Why did I get involved? It must be like such a relief to have something finally done and just, you almost feel like, wow, that was great. It's done. What gives you that, like, I want to start this again. I want to start this.
I know. The idea that we'd even try and do another one was crazy. And I definitely did. After Secret of Kells, I really seriously contemplated going and taking a job somewhere, because it just couldn't have been as hard. I mean, things are much more stable in the studio now. We've got plenty of different jobs and stuff on at the same time. But back in the day, it used to be literally we're back on beans and toast between productions trying to scrape the finance together. We're like, oh, we've got the money in again. Oh, we can eat again. And the Christmas isn't cancelled after all. So it was very, you know, challenging on a personal level. You know, people with families and stuff. It was really challenging in every way. And then you'd get the money and you'd be like, shit, now we have to make this thing. And that was hugely, you know, stressful. And I mean, on Secret of Kells, it was stressful because we were like still in our 20s and suddenly we were trying to make this 6 million, trying not to be exposed as frauds, you know, that we told everyone we could do this. And on Song of the Sea, it was that kind of difficult second album thing where you're like, oh shit, now we've kind of got to show it wasn't just a fluke the first time. So there's a lot of pressure on it. But I mean, we have a great team here. I really feel like it's quite a family atmosphere now. So anytime that I felt kind of overwhelmed or anything, I kind of could look around and feel I had plenty of support and backup around me, which was cool. Yeah, it's a bit crazy. And so the only reason I think we keep going with them is that, for me at least, there's always something I learned on the previous one that I want to apply on the next one. That's it for me. I'm always thinking I could do it better if I just had another bite at the apple. I wonder, maybe after Wolfwalkers I'll stop, because there's so much talent in the studio, and I'm really looking forward to being that kind of cigar chomping producer with my feet up on the table going, yeah, sure, kid, yeah, let's see what you got. And just,
sure.
You know, let someone else do all that.
The Irish John Lasseter.
Yeah, maybe.
You gotta start wearing Hawaiian shirts.
Travel in a scooter.
Actually, I don't remember what my question was going to be, but I remember one that I forgot to ask earlier, which is the fact that one of my favorite actors ever, Brendan Gleeson, I can't believe I didn't ask about him. Hamish, Frank from 28 Days Later, the guard. He's been in both Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea.
Yeah, he's been a great friend of the studio.
What's your relationship like with him?
I mean, Brendan, we only meet him every now and then. I mean, he did both the Irish language and English language version of both films, and he was a great supporter. You know, he was a great supporter for publicity for Secret of Kells especially. actually. He really helped us really early on, like way back. I think it was 2001. We met him. I think Paul's dad knew someone who played fiddle with him in a pub. You know, it was really like that. He was our absolute number one dream choice for the character. So we tried to meet him. I remember driving up, really excited to meet him in his house in Dublin. He was just about to go off and shoot Gangs in New York. That's how long ago it was.
Oh, man, he was so good in that.
Yeah, he was like preparing for Gangs in New York when we arrived into his house, and he kind of recorded the voiceover for a little promotional trailer we were doing. And then I think he was as surprised as us to be working on it like 4 years later. Whenever we said, "Hey, we actually have the money for that thing," he's like, "Oh yeah, that thing." But he was really, really great. And then, I mean, again, he'd record his voice in a few days, and we mightn't see much of him again until we do the Irish dub, and then again when the film is released. But he's always been a great supporter and always speaks really highly of the film. It added a certain level of publicity, at least nationally, for us, which was great.
Well, I wanted to ask about. See, I thought it was official, Wolfwalkers. Mm-hmm. As far as I know, you announced it in November on your Tumblr. Which, can I say, by the way, you have the best name for a Tumblr. Rob, do you know what the name is for his Tumblr?
No.
It's Tomm right? So it's Tomm TOMMTUMB, which that has to be a play on Tom Thumb,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like I was quite proud of the blog of Kells as well back in the day.
Yeah, the blog of Kells. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Wolfwalkers is something that I've been kicking around for a long, long time with Ross, and we're writing it with Will Collins, who was the screenwriter on Song of the Sea. Oh, excuse me.
He disappeared. He's gone.
He went down the imaginary stairs.
Yeah. Pulled my headphones out. I'm fidgeting in my swivel chair and I pulled out the speaker cord. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Wolfwalkers. Yeah. I don't know. There's a couple of projects floating around that I might have to commit to in the meantime. If it pans out that those projects go ahead, I might have to do those. But hopefully Wolfwalkers will be my next sort of original creation. And I mean, as I said, Ross and I are really old friends, so I'm really looking forward to working with him. He took some time out of the studio and went to work in Leica, and he was one of the main artists on Paranorman. And when he came back to Kilkenny, I said, we have to make a movie together. So we've been kind of cooking up Wolfwalkers since then.
Nice. Is there any other information about it? The only information that I know is about killing wolves, essentially.
What happened was, around here in Kilkenny, there was these stories about people that had been cursed by St. Patrick when they wouldn't convert.
Yes.
And they would become people that, when they fell asleep, a wolf form would leave their body. So they wouldn't be quite werewolves. There would be a wolf that would roam the countryside. They would still have their body back asleep at home. So if something happened to the wolf, it would happen to the human body, a bit like an Avatar thing or something. So that was a legend from around here. And we were just chatting about that, Ross and I, and then talking about how the fact that when Oliver Cromwell was trying to tame Ireland, he used to send hunters over that would be given a bit of land if they cleared an area of wolves. And we just sort of thought about an idea of if there was a kid who'd come over from England with his dad who was a wolf hunter, or it became a girl in the final version of the story, and she makes friends with another kid here in Ireland, and they realise that she only realises through the story that the little girl that she's been friends with is actually a wolf as well, and that they're hunting her. And it's a really interesting clash between a really kind of wild pagan society and a really uptight kind of Puritan new way of looking at the world, and it's kind of seen through the eyes of these two kids. And so I just thought that clash was really interesting to play with, and that's something
you seem fascinated with that dichotomy between the two.
Yeah, and it's something that we want to try and express holistically with the animation. I mean, that's something I'd really like to do, even as far as, if possible, have it that the cleanup line is rougher on the characters that are kind of wilder, and cleaner on the characters that are more Puritan and kind of uptight and stuff like that. I'd like to try and explore some of the language of comic books, really expressive comic books, because I think the pity about hand-drawn animation is it's often really expressive in line test, and then it gets a little bit dead whenever you put that thin line around it. So I'd love to, the Tale of Princess Kaguya I thought was a great example of actually using using the kind of the line quality to help tell the story or to show the emotions of the characters. So as much as possible, I'd like to play with that type of stuff in Wolfwalkers. That's why I want to go really super 2D, try everything that 2D can do that's unique to hand-drawn animation as an expressive medium to tell this story of two different worldviews clashing.
How do you feel about the animated pictures kind of peeking its head back into the rated R world? Would you consider maybe something rated R?
Like a rude movie?
Yeah, when's that wolf going to bite someone's face off? That's what I'm
Yeah.
Viking Raid was pretty dark.
I think some of the movies I grew up on, I recently went to the cinema in Dublin that was showing some of the old movies from the 80s. They had a series of films that were movies you wish your kids had seen, or movies you watched as a kid you wish you could show your kids now or something. And they showed Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and E.T. E.T. and Goonies, and a lot of those movies were, pretty dark actually compared to what's considered a kids movie now. I think that influenced me. So I think our stuff tends towards dark. Mainly I'm focused on making movies where kind of for that audience, that sort of family audience, but with a bit of an edge on it. It's not really a commercial concern. It's just been where I've been interested in working so far. On the other hand, I mean, Nora was developing a horror movie for a while, which was probably going to end up having to be like a live action horror movie. So we never say never. But in terms of like gross out, dirty jokes and stuff, I don't know. I don't think that's my wheelhouse, as they say. I'll leave that to the Seth Rogans or whatever.
Interesting. Would Cartoon Saloon consider producing live action stuff?
We did, yeah. We were going to have to change the name of the company. No, we did at one point. We were seriously looking at that, and maybe we'll return to it again after Breadwinner. It was a project that Nora had been developing in live action. But early on in the studio's history, we were just willing to try anything, and we wanted to try everything. And I think we've largely realised that it makes a lot of sense for us to stay within that digital 2D world that we work in, because it's a space we know really well. We can tell our stories well within it, and we're becoming known for that look. So at least for me, at least for my movies, I'm pretty happy to stay with like hand-drawn animation. Maybe tip my toe into some kind of stylized CG, but that's about as far as I'd go. Live action, maybe.
All right. By the way, what's fun is that you started this interview in the center frame, and you've been slowly working your way
backing my way out of the spotlight.
So we got some questions here. You want to answer some audience questions?
Sure thing.
All right. So we got a question here from James T. Nethery Regents, which he likes that nickname. I swear to God, he does. He talks about TV Paint, how you use TV Paint in Song of the Sea, and he was asking about what are some of the benefits and drawbacks to a fully digital workflow. And a second part is that he hears that you also used Anime Studio for some Song of the Sea shots, and he was just wondering if you could go into more detail about how you used the two together.
Well, Anime Studio was something that was used even on Secret of Kells for some small things like plants. So it's not a fully digital pipeline in that a lot of the backgrounds are hand painted on paper, and then you can scan that hand painted image in and move parts of it with Anime Studio.
Yeah.
Probably the biggest thing would be like underwater, like the whale was just a painting that was just boned and moved in Anime Studio, or the little plants on the bottom of the sea, or maybe the grandmother's car, that was Anime Studio Pro, just 2.5D kind of kit that was made out of different painted elements. The benefit of using TV Paint, I think, was two things. One, I think the animation is a little subtler. We were able to do subtler animation. We weren't sort of dividing the work in the way we used to, where the keys would be done in one place and then sent off with X sheets and timing charts to be in between somewhere else. There was a more direct link between the animators and the assistants, and some of the animators were able to do all their own assistant work as well. And with TV Paint, you can do some nice little tiny things like eye darts and little subtle moves that would be trickier on paper. And then the fact that we could do the posing in a file and save that with the layout and send that to the animator, and then they could do their animation on another layer, and we could always just flip off that layer and look at the posing and check, does the animation follow the posing, does the cleanup follow the rough, and so on. It was just a really tidy way to go through the iterative process of animating.
Is the eye dart thing because you can test back right when you're done? Is that why it's easier to do it eye darts in
I think it's an advantage to TV Paint that you can always be checking your animation. Very often I would have done animation on paper and line test it and go, that's not quite what I had in mind, but what can I do to make it work, because I don't want to go back and redraw it all. You know what I mean? If I was on a deadline.
Right.
Whereas with TV Paint, you've got the ability to make more changes on the fly all the time. I think the eye darts is a good example, or maybe like little tight settles. I used to always hate doing like little tight settles because it would take a lot of place and trace and stuff. Whereas with TV Paint, you can just literally cut out part of the character and just move it slightly. That allows you to do much more subtle, tight movements where the drawings are really close together. That's what I think is an advantage. Whereas with paper, I think at least for the type of paper animation we were doing, we would avoid really tight in-betweens like that because they were just so tricky to ask someone to do in another country.
Chris Guido Chris, he asks, what aspect of your visual storytelling do you value most?
I guess the approach to composition and colour to tell the story, because it kind of gives you a really strong building block, and after that the animation, it's better if it's good, but if it's serviceable, the story's already being told by the composition and the colour. I
don't know how you pronounce this guy's name, but I'm going to give it a shot. Jacob Krebil. Jacob Krebil.
Sounds good.
Anyway, he asks, do you think there's a higher demand for independent films like yours, and has Hayao Miyazaki seen your work?
I don't know if Hayao Miyazaki has seen my work.
Have you sat in a room with him and watched it? Just watched him?
No. The most I've done is I shared a cigarette with Miyazaki once, and it was just,
did you really?
Just to share a cigarette with him. I don't smoke or anything. I just borrowed a cigarette off somebody, so because I saw him smoking. He was at this He was at this Academy event, and John Lasseter was giving him an honorary Oscar, and I was there, and I just saw him smoking. I said, I just want to hang out with Miyazaki. So
you have to.
when his translator told her what I was doing, he laughed his head off and kind of just pushed his ashtray over towards me. I was kind of coughing and spluttering and stuff because I don't really smoke, but I just wanted to be a cool kid.
I gotta be honest, I don't smoke either, but I would do the
just
same
to hang
thing.
out with the cool kids, you know. Like,
I would light up
I'm cool.
so fast.
I'm cool. I smoke too. Yeah, sure, I smoke all the time, Mr. Miyazaki. Yeah, it's funny. But what was the other part of the question?
The other part of the question was, do you think there's a higher demand for independent films like yours?
I hope that the audience is growing. I mean, people like G-Kids in the States are introducing more of the independent films to a broader audience. And definitely things like Netflix and Amazon having movies like that available. Yeah. I think video on demand is really the future for independent animation. It's pretty tough to make a return in theaters because you're up against really big marketing budgets. But if you can get any kind of a theatrical run and some kind of notoriety, people then tend to discover you on DVD or video on demand. So I really do hope that the audience is growing for more independent animation. It seems to be. But someone told me once that most poetry books are written for other poets.
Wow.
You just hope that there's an audience beyond the hardcore animation fans and animators that want to see these type of movies, you know. I hope so. That's why I like to try and keep an eye on our movies. Certainly on Song of the Sea, it was really in my mind that I wanted to make sure it wasn't too esoteric, that like an average audience member, like an average kid, if they weren't put off by the art style, could follow the story and enjoy it and take something out of it, so that it wouldn't just be for animation fans, you know. So hopefully we can manage to blend nice art styles with fairly accessible stories in the future.
This is just my question, but are you going to have an animal sidekick in all of the films going forward? Because you had a cat, right?
Yeah.
You have a dog.
Yeah.
In both.
Look, can you see?
And then Wolf.
Yeah, well, the girl has a hawk. She has Merlin. This is her hawk. You can't really see it. Let me.
Well, not with it moving around like that. No.
Hang on. That's who you're gonna meet in the Wolfwalkers.
Oh, look at that.
Merlin the hawk. Yeah. So yeah, we're doing it again.
All right.
Just a formula.
You got cat, you got dog, and now you got bird.
Yeah. Next time, I don't know, earthworm or.
You brought up Netflix. There's actually a question on here. I'll ask that one. Alex Dudley says the pilot for Eddie and the Realms of Eternal was fantastic. Will you shop the show around to Netflix or network TV if Amazon passes on it?
We can't. It was a job for hire. It's up to Amazon whether or not the project goes ahead. So
really?
We still have our fingers crossed. Yeah, no, it wasn't. I mean, that was directed by Paula Marsh here in the studio, and it wasn't a project that was developed here in the studio. It came to us from Amazon. They had two writers that had developed it.
I see.
So it was a job for hire. So when you do a job like that, it's that company's project, and we just sort of executed it for them. But I mean, we designed it, and Paul had a huge input in it as a director. But even if Eddie doesn't go ahead, I think you'll see more from Paul in that style.
Dionysus Sogari says, what made you stick with 2D and eventually make movies with 2D animation instead of going into 3D like everybody else? P.S. I love your movies.
Thanks for backing it up with, yes, I love your movies. What's wrong with you?
I think that's why I put it. I'm not sure for sure because I copied these over, but I'm pretty sure if I go back there, it'll say edited. I should probably put this in there.
No, I mean, I honestly do just love it as an art form. I love drawing. I think that there is, as I said earlier, something timeless about 2D animation. It kind of holds its own longer than CG, in my opinion. I'm just like, because I want to. That's it. You can't stop me.
Jack Morgan, he says, have you had any famous actors or actresses asking for voice roles in your movies after you started gaining success? I'm two-time Oscar nominated. Yeah. That's what he's getting at. And also, when will Wolfwalkers be released? Because I didn't actually ask about that. But
Wolfwalkers.
Are you aiming for a date right now? Or?
I mean, right now we have to see when Wolfwalkers will go into production. We were kind of hoping it would go into production this year, but as I said, there might be other projects that go in front of it. But if it goes into production this year, as we originally hoped, it should be out in about 2 years. There's a lot of things to fall into place for that to work out.
That's pretty quick. You mean from when you start production to the end?
24 months, yeah, usually. But that's usually after we've been working on Wolfwalkers already for a year in terms of script and design and everything like that. So once it hits production, it's pretty much got a locked animatic and you're just producing it. But I don't know if it's going to go into production this year.
And the famous actors and actresses asking to be in your films?
Oh gosh, I wish, yeah. No, I haven't had that yet. I have to say that on Song of the Sea, everybody that we asked was our first choice, which was amazing. I think it was because of because of the Oscar nomination for Secret of Kells, everybody took us seriously and were willing to come on board. And we've got high hopes for the actors in Wolfwalkers. But I guess Angelina Jolie did offer to do a voice in the next film. That's true. But other than that, no.
Oh, I didn't ask this. Did you get to meet Salma Hayek?
Oh, of course, yeah, we did. It was fun. We walked the red carpet with her in Cannes. All the animation guys were walking along beside her, and all the paparazzi were like, "Get out of the way," because they just wanted photos of Salma, you know.
Kaishu Manila asks, what's your daily routine, be it on or off production, and any places you recommend visiting or favorite spots in Ireland?
Oh, gosh.
He also asked about what's your favorite hobbies outside of animation, but I figured that was covered in the tattoo talk.
Yeah, there you go. My routine changes all the time, and that's one of the things I like about it. You know, I mean, there's always meetings and stuff in the studio about the different productions, but depending on whether or not where I am in a production, my routine is very different. So, I mean, in the last days of Song of the Sea, I was spending all my time in editing and sound design, whereas now I'm at the very start of Wolfwalkers. My days are storyboarding, doing design, talking with the writer. Yeah, where do I recommend to visit in Ireland? I mean, I think the West is my favourite part of the country. I think if you come and visit the country, just try and see the real West. Donegal in the northwest, Dingle in the southwest. It's worth to visit.
All right. Rodney T. Oh, this is a great question. Rodney T. Thanks for this question. He says, beard or no beard? What do you prefer? I'm going to leave out the second part, but I like that he brings up that you have a beard. Does this put someone that you know?
How does he know that? Who is it?
I don't know. His name is Rodney T. Masanga.
What? I don't know this person.
He's behind you right now.
That's a pseudonym. That's possibly my wife. I'm not sure. Yeah, no, I think the beard is just sheer laziness since Christmas.
That's my excuse.
I didn't know if it was a seasonal thing. Like, I shave my head every summer.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly. It's a winter beard. I'm shocked by the amount of grey in it now. I turned 39 there in January, and I think I should shave the beard off to try and keep my youthfulness.
I wouldn't have even asked this question if it wasn't for a way for me to sidestep and say that I thought that I've been interviewing Stephen Colbert this whole time.
No, that's really my excuse too. I just let this go because I hate the fact that I have to cut it for the rest of my life.
Well, yeah, but you look like Fidel Castro when you have.
Oh yeah.
No, I do really like. I love going to. There's a Turkish barber in town. I'm really looking forward to going down and getting a really clean shave. It'll feel really good. It's like let it grow for a while and let it get all like grizzly and hairy, and then get it all shaved off.
But you just have that constant fear that something's in your beard the whole time, and hope that someone will tell you what is that on your face.
It's funny, isn't it? Because beards have gotten so trendy. I mean, I used to wear a beard when I was younger to try and look older because nobody took me seriously. That there was like this 20-something studio owner. I remember a guy arrived into the studio from France to work in Secret of Kells, and he was sitting beside me on a Sunday. We were working extra hours, and he turned to me and he goes, "What's the director like? Is he an asshole?" And it felt a bit awkward for him. You know?
Yeah, I didn't know if you were growing it for the Wolfwalkers, just to get in the mood.
Getting grizzly. Yeah.
Chris Cookson, I'm going to cut to the chase. He basically asked, how are you able to make such personal projects without really making any compromises for marketability?
I think it's just the way we make them as co-productions for low budgets. We don't make them for one client who might have an agenda or an idea that they're going to make a certain amount of money back on the other side. Those type of projects are floating around now, and we could choose one carefully, but it's tricky. It's a different skill, I think, to make a movie for a client or for a studio that has a marketing plan on the other side of it, because as he says in his question, you need to take into consideration, I mean, it must be a huge pressure to work on like a 60 million or 100 million animated feature, because that has to make so much money back. But when we make our movies for low budgets, I think we've got a lot more freedom.
Yeah, and the other thing is on those large budgets, if you're not also the producer,
you could be fired.
You risk getting kicked off of the thing.
I always used to joke I'd love to be like the second director. You know, there's always 3 directors, and so like the second director doesn't get blamed for anything, and he doesn't have his original have his original idea ruined, and he probably gets paid a load of money to like and then the third director comes on and has to like deliver the final film and stand beside it. Someday I'll go and be the second director in some big troubled movie. Get well paid.
We only got 2 more questions. This one's from Ashley Catherine Fontanes? I don't know how you pronounce it. Anyway, asks, how do your ideas come to you? Let's sum it up there. Because she says, she remembers hearing that you originally were an illustrator, and I think we kind of went through that. And do you find yourself visualizing the look of a project before it's completed? And I think we went through that as well. So it sums up in how do your ideas come to you? Like, where's the fruition start?
Well, it's different for different films, but definitely everything starts in the sketchbook. Everything starts from imagery, and then the story evolves evolves alongside the imagery now. But the ideas come from different places. I mean, in Song of the Sea, I was inspired after I saw a seal cull in the west of Ireland. All these seals had been killed, and it made me realise that there was something being lost in terms of our connection to the wildlife. I started thinking about Selkie stories and folklore and stuff like that. So that idea came from just something that happened. I mean, Wolfwalkers was literally Ross and I having a chat over lunch while we were doing a writing course. I think it was Brenda Chapman was teaching a writing course in Dublin, and we went for lunch and we just made a list of all the things we liked and all the things we hated. And I think it's a really good trick because those are things you're passionate about. So we were like hunting, like things we didn't like and things that we did like, and we kind of mushed them all together and came up with a story that way. So it's different every time.
The last question, Emmett Goodman. He said, even though Don Bluth has worked in Ireland, there's been animation scene there for years, it really feels like your movies have a distinctive identity to them. How do you look at your and Cartoon Saloon's contributions to the animation culture at large?
I don't know. I mean, we just try and make movies that we're proud of and let someone else kind of judge it. But I mean, one thing that we always want to do is make stuff that we feel is making a positive contribution. I mean, there's so many companies that are busy making entertainment and stuff, and it's so hard for us to get our films made, and it's such a long process that we always want to make sure it's something pretty heartfelt or speaking from a truthful place, something that we really want to communicate. And then after that, I mean, if we do an honest job, it's really up to the audience to judge what kind of contribution it's making, if any.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, which I didn't mention earlier, which was I learned at the Manchester Animation Festival while I was sitting there and I was listening that film is a 2-syllable word.
Film.
Anyway, so that's it. That's all the questions. Thanks for doing this. It was a lot of fun.
If people are interested in seeing what we're up to, I mean, we're on Twitter. Myself and Nora and Paul are on Twitter. There's an official Cartoon Saloon Twitter account too. You can go to cartoonsaloon.ie and follow us on our website. And watch out for Breadwinner. Is probably our next big production that's going to be coming out sometime at the beginning of next year, I imagine. So, and thanks for having me on the show, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And that'll do it for this episode of the RubberOnion Animation Podcast. I hope you dug it. Tom will be at the CTN Animation Expo again this year in November, and you can and should follow him on Twitter. That's at Tomm Moore, TOMM Moore. And all the handles that he said in the show, which will be linked in the podcast post that houses this episode. Thank you to my patrons who help me make things like this, and also are helping me make the next Tip in a Minute video on animation smears. That'll be fun. You can too by going to patreon.com/RubberOnion. And remember, there's a ton of perks there. Check those out. I want to thank my co-host Rob Ulfo for being the icebreaker extraordinaire. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Rob Ulfo, and his website, MrRobUlfo.com. That's Mr. with an MR. So it's MrRobYulfo. And I'm Steve Brooks. I'm the Rubber Onion, and you can follow me at Rubber Onion everywhere on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, Google+, Newgrounds, SoundCloud, and Instagram, which houses our Rubber Onion animation battles. It's a monthly animation battle. This one, the month of March, the topic is Robot Coworker. People have already finished theirs and sent them in. I'm almost done with mine. It's a lot of fun. Anyone can participate. So if you want to join in, just make an animated thing under 15 seconds by the end of the month and tag it with hashtag Rubber Onion Battle on Instagram. And also check out that space for what April's topic is going to be. If you want to support Rubber Onion, check me out on Patreon. As I said, if you want to support Rubber Onion without giving me money, please rate and review us on iTunes. It seriously helps a lot. But the main place to go for all things Rubber Onion is rubberonion.com, where you find this podcast and my blog and a bunch of other stuff. Boy, I say Rubber Onion a lot, but you know what? It's my show, so I'm going to do that. Thanks again to Tomm Moore for being on the show. It was a lot of fun. Thank you again for listening to another episode of, that's right, the Rubber Onion Animation Podcast. One more time. I had to say it one more time. If you like it, subscribe, tell your friends about it, and don't forget to say hi. Bye.